I already did. But I switched our bowls while you were gone.
I watched my husband pour a small packet of white powder into my soup while he thought my back was turned. I did not scream. I did not confront him. I waited until he stepped out of the dining room, switched our bowls, and sat back down as if nothing had happened. 30 minutes later, Daniel was gripping the edge of the table, his face drained of color, and the first words that came out of his mouth told me something even worse than what he had put in my dinner. He whispered, "This wasn't supposed to happen to me." That was the moment I realized my husband had not made a mistake. He had made a plan, and I had just turned it back on him. Hello. My name is Rachel Bennett. I was 38 years old when I learned that the man I had slept beside for 9 years had been quietly preparing for a life that did not include me. Until that night, I thought my marriage was tired, not dangerous. Daniel and I lived outside Columbus, Ohio, in a 2-story house with gray siding, a maple tree in the front yard, and a kitchen I had spent nearly 6 months redesigning. I worked as a project manager for a commercial design company. Daniel owned a small financial consulting business. From the outside, we looked stable, responsible, boring even. We had no children. That had once been a painful subject. But over the years, we had learned how to stop answering questions about it. Or at least I thought we had. For most of our marriage, Daniel had been charming in a quiet way. He remembered birthdays. He made coffee before I woke up. He could turn a bad evening around with one joke. But during the 6 months before the soup incident, something had changed. He started guarding his phone. He became unusually interested in my work schedule. He asked questions about my retirement account, my company life, insurance benefits, and the small inheritance my grandmother had left me. At first, I told myself he was just being practical. Then he started asking stranger questions. Does your company still pay out if someone dies outside of work? Did your grandmother's trust automatically transfer to a spouse? Who gets the house if something happens to you? Every question had a reasonable explanation when I challenged him. He was updating our finances. He was preparing taxes. He was thinking about estate planning. There was always an answer. And because I loved him, I accepted those answers longer than I should have. The first moment that truly unsettled me happened 3 weeks before the soup. I came home early from work because a client meeting had been canceled. Daniel was in his office with the door nearly closed. I heard him say, "No, she hasn't changed anything yet." A thin silence. Then, "I told you. I'll handle it." When I walked in, he ended the call so quickly that he nearly dropped his phone. "Who was that?" I asked. "A client." "What client?" He smiled. "Rachel. Do you want their social security number too?" He kissed my forehead and walked past me. That should have made me angry. Instead, it made me feel embarrassed for asking. That was one of Daniel's talents. He could make suspicion feel like a character flaw. A week later, I found a second phone charger in his car. Not a phone. Just the charger. When I asked about it, he said it belonged to a client who had left it behind. 2 days after that, I found a receipt from a hotel 20 miles from our house. Daniel told me he had met an investor there. Again, possible. Again, believable. Again, just enough explanation to make me doubt myself. Then came the Tuesday night that changed everything. It was raining hard when I got home. Daniel had texted me that afternoon saying he was cooking dinner. That alone was unusual. He could cook, but he rarely did on weekdays. When I walked into the kitchen, the lights were low, soft jazz was playing from the speaker, and 2 bowls of tomato basil soup were sitting on the counter. Daniel looked almost cheerful. "There she is," he said. "Long day." "Very. Set down. I've got everything." He poured wine into 2 glasses. I remember thinking that he was trying. Maybe I had been too suspicious. Maybe this was his way of reconnecting. I went upstairs to change out of my work clothes. When I came back down, Daniel was carrying the bowls into the dining room. I sat across from him. He smiled. "To us," he said, lifting his glass. I almost laughed because it felt so formal. "To us." We drank. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. I have to take this. 2 minutes. He walked toward the hallway. I looked down at my soup. Then I realized I had left my reading glasses on the kitchen island. I stood up and walked back toward the kitchen. That was when I saw him. Daniel had not gone into the hallway. He had doubled back. He was standing beside my chair with his back partially turned toward me. In his right hand was a tiny folded packet. I froze. He tore it open. Then he poured something into the bowl in front of my seat. He stirred it twice with my spoon. My entire body went cold. I stepped backward before he could see me and moved behind the wall, separating the kitchen from the dining room. I could hear my heartbeat. A moment later, he walked away, actually answering his phone this time. I stared at the two bowls, one in front of my chair, one in front of his. For several seconds, I could not move. My mind tried to protect me. Maybe it was seasoning. Maybe it was medicine. Maybe I had misunderstood. But there was one fact I could not explain away. He had looked around before doing it. People do not secretly add basil to their wife's soup. My hands were shaking when I returned to the table. Daniel was still in the hallway. I did not know what he had put in my bowl. I did not know what it would do. And I did not know how much danger I was in. So I made the fastest decision of my life. I switched the bowls, then I moved the spoons. Then I sat down. When Daniel returned, I forced myself to smile. Problem? I asked. Nothing important. He sat down and watched me. That was the part I will never forget. He watched me take my first spoonful. His eyes followed the spoon from the bowl to my mouth. I swallowed. Of course, I was eating from his original bowl. He relaxed. Then he began eating from mine. For the next 10 minutes, we made meaningless conversation. He asked about work. I told him one of our contractors had missed a deadline. He nodded. He ate. I kept counting his spoonfuls. 5, 8, 11. At some point I realized I was barely breathing. Then Daniel asked, "You feeling okay?" There it was. The question. I looked at him. Why wouldn't I be? No reason. You just look tired. I am tired. He smiled, but his fingers tapped against the table. 5 minutes later, he asked again, "Any headache?" I put down my spoon. Daniel, what is going on with you? Nothing. You've asked me twice if I'm okay. I'm concerned about my wife. Is that illegal now? His voice was playful, but his eyes were not. Then something strange happened. His hand slipped off the table. He looked down at it as if it belonged to somebody else. He tried to pick up his wine glass and missed. Daniel? I'm fine? He blinked hard. Then he stood. Or tried to. His chair scraped backward, and his knees nearly folded. I jumped up. He grabbed the table. What did you do? He said. The words came out thick. I stared at him. What did I do? His eyes widened. He looked at my bowl, then at his, then at me, and in that second he understood. You switched them. It was not a question. I felt something inside me break. You put something in my soup. His face changed. Not guilt. Fear. Pure fear. You switched them, he repeated. What was in that packet? He stumbled sideways. Call? He stopped himself. Call who? He looked toward the hallway. Daniel? What did you put in my food? He sank into the chair. His breathing was fast now. Then he whispered the sentence that still wakes me up sometimes. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. I took out my phone and called 911. While I spoke to the dispatcher, Daniel tried to stand again. He made it 3 steps before collapsing against the wall. He was conscious, but confused. I did not touch the bowls. I did not clean anything. I did not throw away the packet, because I had noticed it on the floor beside my chair. I left everything exactly where it was. The paramedics arrived first. Then the police. Daniel was transported to the hospital. An officer named Martinez stayed with me in the dining room. She asked me to explain what happened. I told her everything. When I finished, she looked at the bowls. Do you have any reason to believe your husband wanted to hurt you? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because until she asked that question, I had still been treating the evening like an accident. A terrible accident. A secret medication. A misunderstanding. Anything but what it looked like. I don't know, I finally said. Officer Martinez nodded. Is there anywhere you can stay tonight? I looked around my own house and realized I did not feel safe in it. My sister? Good. Don't stay here alone. Before I left, I packed one bag. Then I did something I had never done before. I opened Daniel's office. Not to snoop, to survive. His desk looked normal. Laptop, invoices, pens, a framed photo of us from our 6th anniversary. I almost walked out. Then I saw a small black key taped under the desk. I pulled it free. The key opened the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet. Inside was an envelope with my name on it. Rachi L. My hand started trembling again. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of my insurance information, my grandmother's trust documents, and a printed valuation of our house. But that was not the worst part. There was also a document I had never seen before. A draft of a new will. My signature was at the bottom, except I had never signed it. According to that document, almost everything I owned would transfer directly to Daniel. I took photographs with my phone. Then I called Officer Martinez back. She returned with another officer. They took the papers as evidence. My sister Emily picked me up just after midnight. I spent the night in her guest room staring at the ceiling. At 20:17 in the morning, Daniel called. I did not answer. At 2:18 he called again. At 20:20 he sent a message. Rachel, this is not what you think. I almost threw my phone across the room. At 2:24, another message arrived. Please do not talk to anyone until I explain. That sentence did something useful. It made my fear turn into anger. I took screenshots. Then I turned off my phone. The next morning, I learned Daniel had been released from the hospital. Whatever had been in the soup had made him severely drowsy and disoriented, but he was stable. The police would not tell me exactly what they suspected yet. They only told me not to meet him alone. Daniel sent 17 messages that day. He said the powder was nothing dangerous. He said he had been trying to help me sleep. He said he was worried about my stress. He said I was overreacting. Then, when none of that worked, his tone changed. You switched the bowls on purpose. You could have killed me. I stared at that message for a full minute. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I finally understood the kind of man I was dealing with. He had secretly put an unknown substance into my dinner, and somehow he had found a way to make himself the victim. I sent every message to Officer Martinez. Then I stopped responding. That afternoon, Emily and I went to my bank. I froze my personal accounts. I changed passwords. I contacted my employer, and I hired an attorney named Claire Donnelly. Claire was in her 50s, calm, direct, and almost impossible to intimidate. She listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Rachel, I need you to understand something. Do not focus on proving why he did it yet. Focus on preserving evidence. So I did. Claire helped me request copies of every financial document Daniel might have accessed. That was when the second shock arrived. 3 months earlier, someone had attempted to increase a life insurance policy connected to me. The change had not gone through because one form required additional verification. The contact email listed on the request was not mine. It was an email address I had never seen. Claire stared at the printout. Do you recognize it? No. Does Daniel? I'm guessing we're gonna find out. The next day, Officer Martinez called. Investigators had found another phone in Daniel's car. The phone charger I had seen months earlier suddenly made sense. I felt sick. They would not give me details from the phone because the investigation was active. But they asked me one strange question. Do you know a woman named Vanessa Cole? I did. Vanessa was Daniel's former office manager. She had supposedly moved to Indianapolis 8 months earlier. I had met her maybe 6 times. She was smart, polished, and always slightly too familiar with Daniel. No, I said slowly. Not well. There was silence on the line. Then Officer Martinez said, if she contacts you, do not engage. Call us. That night, I searched Vanessa's name online. Her public profiles were mostly empty, but an old photo showed her at a charity dinner wearing a silver necklace. I had seen that necklace before. 3 months earlier, I had found it under the passenger seat of Daniel's car. He told me it belonged to a client. I closed my laptop. Suddenly, the hotel receipt made sense. The secret calls made sense. The second charger made sense. But an affair still did not explain the soup. An affair explains lies. It does not explain a forged will. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at Emily's house. He stood on the porch holding flowers. Emily looked through the window and said, "You have got to be kidding me." I called the police. Before they arrived, Daniel kept knocking. "Rachel, please." I stayed behind the locked door. "Go away. I made a mistake." "What was in the soup?" Silence. Then, "I can explain." "What was in the soup?" "I was supposed to make you sleep." "Why?" Another silence. Then he said, "You've been exhausted." I laughed once. "Then why did you ask if I had a headache before you started feeling anything?" He stopped talking. I continued, "Why did you watch me eat?" Nothing." "Why is there a fake will in your office?" His face changed through the glass. That was the first time I saw it clearly. He had not expected me to find the drawer. The police arrived minutes later and escorted him away. Claire filed for a protective order. Then she began the divorce process. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. 1 week later, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line said Ask Heim Aboutt Basament Cam I. There was no signature, no attachment. Just that sentence. I showed it to Claire and the police. Our house did have a basement. Half storage, half workshop. Daniel spent more time down there than I did. With police approval, I returned to the house accompanied by an officer to collect more clothing and personal items. I asked about the basement. The officer checked the room. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then we found a small camera aimed toward the workbench. Not the stairs. Not the door. The workbench. On the workbench sat a plastic storage bin containing old prescription bottles, household paperwork, and several sealed envelopes. The police took the camera and the bin. I was not allowed to examine them. But before we left, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. One of the envelopes had my employer's logo on it. I had never brought it downstairs. That evening, Daniel's business partner called me. His name was Mark Ellison. He sounded nervous. "I don't know if I should be calling you." "Then why are you?" "Because Daniel asked me to destroy some files." I sat down. "What files?" He said they were outdated client records. But after everything that happened, I checked the folder names. He paused. "One of them had your name." The next 24 hours changed the entire investigation. Mark gave the police access to Daniel's office computer. The deleted files were recovered. There were spreadsheets tracking my assets, copies of my signatures, scans of insurance documents, notes about my schedule, and a folder labeled VC Vanessa Cole. Inside were messages between Daniel and Vanessa. I did not read all of them. I did not need to. The investigators summarized enough. Daniel and Vanessa had been having an affair for more than a year. They had also been discussing money. My money. The plan, according to the messages, was not some dramatic movie murder. It was colder than that. Daniel had been trying to create a record that I was unstable, overworked, and misusing medication. He had encouraged me to drink more wine at dinner. He had suggested I take time off because I was not acting like myself. He had even sent texts to my sister months earlier, asking whether she had noticed me becoming forgetful. At the time, Emily had thought he was being concerned. Now we understood. He had been building a story. A version of me that could be used later. The substance in the soup, investigators believed, was meant to leave me impaired enough for Daniel to stage a frightening incident and strengthen that story. There were also messages suggesting he intended to pressure me into signing financial documents while I was vulnerable. The forged will was apparently a backup draft. When Officer Martinez told me that, I had to sit down, not because I was surprised anymore, because I suddenly remembered 3 earlier nights when I had woken up unusually groggy after dinner. 3 nights I had blamed on exhaustion. 3 nights Daniel had been incredibly attentive the next morning. He had made coffee. He had asked how much I remembered. He had joked that I was getting old. I felt physically sick. Was this the first time? I asked. Officer Martinez did not answer immediately. We're investigating that. That was enough. For 3 days, I barely slept. Every memory became suspicious. Every meal, every glass of wine. Every night I had trusted him enough to close my eyes. Then something happened that gave me back a little control. Vanessa contacted the police through an attorney. She wanted to cooperate. Apparently, after Daniel accidentally consumed the substance himself and the police began examining his finances, he had tried to blame everything on her. He told investigators Vanessa had forged documents. He told Mark she had manipulated him. He told Vanessa that if she stayed quiet, he would fix it. She decided he was going to sacrifice her to save himself. So she gave investigators her messages, all of them. And suddenly Daniel's explanations collapsed. The email about the basement camera had come from Vanessa. She knew Daniel recorded parts of his tests because he wanted proof of how impaired I appeared. That detail nearly broke me. He had recorded me. In my own home. At my most vulnerable, not because he loved me, because he was collecting material. Claire warned me that the legal process would take time, but Daniel's personal collapse happened much faster. His business partner removed him from daily operations. Several clients left. His accounts came under scrutiny. The protective order kept him away from me. And then, 1 month after the dinner, I saw him for the first time in court. He looked smaller. Not physically. Something about him had shrunk. He wore the navy suit I had bought him for our anniversary. He kept looking at me like he expected me to soften. I did not. During a break, he approached Claire and asked if he could speak to me. Claire looked at me. I surprised myself. 5 minutes. I said. With you here. We stood in a quiet hallway. Daniel swallowed. Rachel, I know how this looks. I almost smiled. How it looks? I never wanted to hurt you. You secretly put something in my food. I wanted you to sleep. You forged my signature. That document was never final. You tracked my assets. We were married. You had another phone. He looked away. I continued. You had an affair. You recorded me. You tried to create a story that I was unstable. And when your own plan landed in your bowl, you blamed me. He rubbed his forehead. I panicked. No, Daniel. You planned. That sentence stopped him. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Then he tried one final move. The move people like Daniel use when excuses fail. He cried. Not dramatically. Just enough. Tears in his eyes. Soft voice. I loved you. I looked at him for a long time. I think you loved what trusting you allowed you to control. His face hardened. There he was. The real Daniel. The sadness disappeared almost instantly. You're going to destroy everything we built. I shook my head. No. I'm just refusing to be buried under it. Claire touched my arm. We walked away. The divorce became ugly. Daniel fought over the house. He fought over accounts. He accused me of intentionally poisoning him by switching the bowls. That argument did not help him nearly as much as he expected. Considering the substance had come from his own hand, and the evidence supported my account. My attorney did not let me turn the case into revenge theater. She kept saying, documents, evidence, patience, so I followed her advice. And slowly, piece by piece, the life Daniel had constructed from lies began falling apart. Vanessa entered her own agreement with prosecutors and testified about the financial planning and the attempts to manipulate me. Mark testified about the deleted records. The camera footage showed Daniel handling materials and arranging scenes in the basement. Digital records connected him to the forged documents. My messages showed the pattern of him questioning my memory and health. The bowl switch had saved me from whatever he intended that night, but evidence saved me from being called crazy afterward. That mattered, because Daniel's favorite weapon had never been the powder. It was doubt. He wanted me to doubt my memory, my instincts, my judgment, my right to ask questions. Once I stopped doubting myself, he lost most of his power. Several months later, the divorce was finalized. I kept my separate inheritance. The forged documents were invalid. The house was sold. I did not want it. People were surprised by that. They assumed I would fight to keep it, because I had designed the kitchen, chosen the floors, planted the roses, and spent years turning that building into a home. But I had learned something. A house is not a home just because you worked hard on it. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop fighting for a place that holds too many lies. Daniel's legal problems continued beyond the divorce. I will not pretend I celebrated every development. Some days I felt satisfied. Some days I felt empty. Some days I missed the man I thought he had been. That is the strange part about betrayal. You can know someone hurt you and still grieve the version of them you loved. Emily helped me find a small apartment near downtown. It had terrible cabinets, noisy plumbing, and a balcony barely large enough for 2 chairs. I loved it. For the first time in months, I could eat dinner without watching another person's hands. Still, healing was not clean. The first time a friend cooked for me, I stared at the bowl too long. She noticed. Without making a big deal of it, she switched bowls with me. "Take mine," she said. I almost cried, not because I was afraid of her, because kindness had become unfamiliar. A year after that night, Claire called me. There had been a final development in Daniel's case. He had accepted responsibility for several charges connected to the forged documents and his actions surrounding the attempts to impair and manipulate me. The exact legal outcome mattered less to me than I expected. I had spent months imagining justice as a dramatic moment. A judge's words. A courtroom gasp. Daniel finally admitting everything. But when the call came, I was standing in a grocery store holding a carton of tomatoes. And all I felt was quiet. Claire said, "You okay?" I looked around at people pushing carts, comparing prices, living ordinary lives. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. That night, I made tomato basil soup. For a long time, I had avoided it. The smell brought me back to the dining room, to Daniel watching my spoon, to the scrape of his chair when his legs stopped cooperating. But I was tired of letting one memory own an entire meal. So I cooked, I chopped the onions, added the tomatoes, stirred the pot. Then I poured one bowl, just one. I carried it to the tiny balcony and watched the city lights come on. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. For half a second, my chest tightened. Then I opened it. "Daniel, I do not know how he got the number." The message said, "I hope someday you understand I never meant for any of this to happen." I read it twice. Then I blocked the number. Because he was still lying. Of course he meant for it to happen. Maybe not exactly the way it did. Maybe he did not mean to consume what he had secretly put in my bowl. Maybe he did not mean for me to find the forged will. Maybe he did not mean for Vanessa to cooperate. Maybe he did not mean for his business partner to recover deleted files. Maybe he did not mean for police to find the camera. But he meant to deceive me. He meant to manipulate me. He meant to make me weaker so he could become stronger. What he did not mean was for me to notice. That was the difference. I sat on my balcony, took one spoonful of soup, and smiled. People sometimes ask me whether switching those bowls was revenge. It was not. It was survival. The revenge came later. The revenge was telling the truth when he expected my silence. The revenge was keeping the money he tried to take. The revenge was walking into court with my head up. The revenge was rebuilding a life where nobody needed me confused, frightened, or asleep in order to control me. And the greatest revenge of all was something Daniel never planned for. I became happy without him. So if there is one thing I learned from the night my husband slipped something into my soup, it is this: trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Preserve the evidence. Tell someone, and never confuse a person's confidence with innocence. Daniel thought the most dangerous thing at our dinner table was the secret inside my bowl. He was wrong. The most dangerous thing was the moment I finally stopped doubting what I saw. Because 30 minutes after I switched our bowls, my husband began losing control. And 1 year later, I had taken back every piece of my life he thought he could steal. He tried to write the ending for me. Instead, he handed me the truth. And I wrote my own,